Welcome to this special edition of 2.5 Hours. My name is Manuel Rapalo, and we're coming to you every week from America's capital, Washington, D.C., with the discussion focusing on the U.S. presidential elections. And with the elections nearing, Americans are keeping a close eye on who will be the presidential nominee from the Republican Party. Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney has maintained a visible lead among contenders, although U.S. Senator Rick Santorum and former House Speaker Newt Gingrich have a solid following. And we can't leave out Ron Paul, or can we? Is the Texas congressman still a wild card in this race? Also, will the positive numbers from the job market be enough to keep President Obama in office for another term, or are record-high fuel prices burning away at his support? These and more topics to be discussed by today's panel. Joining us, we have Communications Director of the Institute for America's Future, Elizabeth Rose, Director of the Bipartisan Policy Center, John Fortier, and with campaign strategies and D.C. recall movement and journalist Frederick Butler, and with the Oppenheimer Group, Washington economist Roland Amore. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and jump right in. I want to hear your thoughts on the Republican nominees so far. And the Republicans seem to be a little bit divided right now. Is this an actual difference among ideologies with the candidates, or is this something about the party? I'm wondering what you're thinking. Is there actually a difference among these candidates, a noticeable difference?
There actually is a difference among these candidates. I have to say that it's thrilling to be able to watch this race on the Republican side. It's really exciting. It's democracy in action. There actually is a little bit of a difference between these guys. Mitt Romney has the most money. He is the most centrist of them. Rick Santorum is a social conservative. He has been his entire career, and there is a big difference between those two guys. Ron Paul has one issue. He's fiscal conservative. That's his issue. On social issues, he never talks about them. He doesn't care about them, and that's been his history. And Newt Gingrich is all over the map. I mean, he it's not easy to categorize him. He's in some ways conservative and in some ways much less so. So I think there really are differences.
Some would say that it's actually Mitt Romney that goes back and forth, and then you can't really pin down exactly what he stands for. John, what are your takes? Do you think that there's a real divide among the way these candidates think?
I do think there is a difference, and that your analysis is basically right. Mitt Romney is the front runner, the establishment candidate. But this is still an argument within the Republican Party. And if you step back and look, there's not a grand difference between what they're advocating. Just like we saw in the Democratic race between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, it wasn't so much they were dramatically different on policy as much as who was the true conservative, or in the case of Democrats, who was the true liberal, who's most likely to bear that message from the heart, who's the best candidate to run against the president, who is, more pure to conservative principles. And for Mitt Romney, he has some things in his background, especially being the governor of a moderate state, having some different positions, having changed them. There's some question among conservatives, does he really hold these views truly? And secondly, is he the one you really want to go up there against the president in the fall? I think that's the argument he's making, saying, I'm actually much more of an electable candidate than the others. But there still is, among the most conservative voters in the primary, some question about whether Mitt Romney is one of them.
Would you guys agree? Do you think as though the candidates seem to, they're all Republicans, but there seems to be a divide. I could be wrong. There seems to be a divide within the Republican Party itself. Do you think that it's due to the candidates, or are Republicans today, maybe more so than in 2008, more divided ideologically?
I think what they've done is divided the base, and I wouldn't say there's any difference in their ideologies, more or less their methods. And I think what they're trying to do now is just each one picks out a demographic and they try to appeal to it. And it divides the party, and I think they're all the same. It's just you have people that like their Republican Mitt Romney and some people who like their Republican Newt Gingrich and so forth, based on whatever social issue that they pick out at the time. So they're pretty much all the same.
It's interesting. I view it a little bit differently. I view this as the recharging of the Republican Party. Let me explain why. First of all, the three candidates there are major differences. If you look at it from a conservative to a moderate perspective, they are different. And by the way, Ron Paul on social issues, he doesn't talk much about it, but he's a libertarian, so he knows where he stands on all that. But here is something different. Traditionally, the Republican Party has given the nomination to the on-deck batter. It was McCain last time. It was Dole. You go all the way. The on-deck batter this time was Romney, and it's not being handed to him. What we're seeing is for the first time in many, many election cycles where the Republican Party is actually coming alive. They're reinvigorated. Some can call that a negative energy or non-constructive energy, but I disagree. I think this is really sharpening the party. It's waking up the voters. It's waking up the candidates. I think whoever the final candidate is going to be that much stronger when they go into the general election. This brings out the best, not the worst of them. And I cite as an example, look at the Democrats at the last cycle. There was a vicious, ferocious fight between the Obama and the Clinton people. And what you had was the survivor was a much stronger candidate.
I just have to jump in. It's so funny that you mentioned that. I don't know if you saw, there's a new kind of infomercial from the Obama campaign. It's really a brilliantly done 15-minute slick Hollywood piece reintroducing Barack Obama and what he's done. It's really a great ad. And starring Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. I mean, they're in this ad, and they're great.
That's definitely a point that I want to bring up is this new film by the Obama people for the Obama administration. But I want to get back to a point that Roland brought up, and that's re-energizing the Republican Party. There's some that would argue that nothing that happens in these races is by coincidence, that it's all strategic. Do you think, and getting to what you mentioned about Ron Paul as well, do you think he may be the next one to drop out of the race? And could that be a game changer later on? Is that strategic that he'd be dropping out now to maybe come back? And he has a solid group of supporters. His followers are dead set on Ron Paul. That's something that he's notorious for even. What's going to happen to those supporters? Is that going to be a game changer later on as the race starts to narrow?
Yeah, I don't think Ron Paul is the next likely dropout. I think if anyone is likely to drop out, it's Newt Gingrich. And he said he is not going to right now. He's done poorly, really, essentially since his win in South Carolina a long time ago in January, winning his home state, and doing okay in a couple Southern primaries the other day, but not winning them. There's a lot of reason why he might drop out. He's clearly the third person in the race. Ron Paul has a following that will be with him no matter what. He can raise money, but doesn't absolutely need to. He has people committed to him. But I think the interesting thing about this race is how he's actually formed a sort of informal alliance with Mitt Romney. Of all people, Mitt Romney, the most establishment-oriented candidate, Ron Paul is frequently seen criticizing Rick Santorum or Rick Perry or Newt Gingrich as being just as establishment as Mitt Romney. And there's some talk that there certainly has been some talk between the campaigns about a role for Ron Paul. Ron Paul has a son now in the Senate who might want a future in the party. I don't think it's anything like the vice presidency or a cabinet position for these people, but I think Ron Paul in some ways is looking for his brand of conservative libertarianism, Tea Partyism, to be brought into the party, to have a role at the convention, to be in some ways see that version of republicanism tamed and brought into the mainstream.
How is this happening? How is this happening when you got two candidates that seem so different? Even within the Republican Party, they seem like they are polar opposites ideologically. I've heard this analysis before, and I think it's very interesting that ultimately we could see if Mitt Romney got the nomination, we could see a full endorsement by Ron Paul. And I think the speculation is coming from Ron Paul, during a debate will attack every one of the other candidates. We'll talk about social issues, leave out health care, to not make a point to highlight Mitt Romney's health care plan in Massachusetts. Do you think that this is all kind of foreshadowing that?
I can't see that. And let me explain why. It's very interesting. Ron Paul's largest asset is his consistency. Mm-hmm. If he were to endorse Mitt Romney, he would lose that consistency. You got to look at the libertarians. Look at their beliefs. It is a different animal. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. As a matter of fact, it's the most ideological, pure type of belief. As an example, they believe in small government in every aspect. Small government in terms of taxation, in terms of social issues, in terms of defense, everywhere. Republicans believe in small government on the business side, laissez-faire, but they socially want to get involved. Whereas Democrats believe in social freedoms, but in terms of government controlling the business, the company, the country, and so forth, they believe in a much larger grasp. You have an ideological purity, within libertarianism. Ron Paul, I'm not so sure after 30-something years is going to chuck that with an endorsement.
So these are 2 points of view.
He is a Republican, and his son is a Republican. And
that brings me to my next point.
A Texas Republican.
These are 2 different points of view that I'm seeing. Do you think that Ron Paul maybe just be riding the GOP horse and then break away for a third party sort of run if he decides
his
to?
His son has already said he would not support his dad if he broke off from the Republican Party. So, I mean, I think you're making a lot of good. I think you're both making good points. One idea is that Ron Paul might say, "Look, these are a few issues that are important to me. I want a role at the convention." He's already said that. I want to be in charge. You know, he's going to be the next Simpson Bowles deficit cutter, right? He's going to want an important role in deficit cutting. He'll probably go on and on about gold. It won't be effective. But, you know, he's going to have a few demands that will either be, you know, either Romney will say he's going to do them or Romney will do them or the party will put them on the platform. It may not be the most effective way to make change. But I'm sure he has a list of 5 or 6
He's going to become a
Well,
statesman.
Frederick, I see you nodding your head. I've seen you nodding your head. What are your thoughts?
Here's the thing. Do I think Ron Paul will support somebody? No. Basically, because I don't think it will help his brand. If anything, it will harm it. Speaking of like the brand element, I think what we're seeing here is some of these candidates could be trying to be more or less kind of like the new Sarah Palin. You said that you think the debate is re-energizing the Republican Party, but I don't know how to articulate this in the best fashion, but I think what we could be seeing here is a lot of the candidates carving out their sect of a Republican base, branding it, and then after the election, using their platform to aid book sales in their public persona, and not necessarily propel any policies or reunite the party. I honestly, after what Palin did during the 2008 election cycle, I fear that that's going to become the normal way of the Republican candidates.
The domain of ex-presidents, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying they're really each out for themselves.
Pretty much.
Newt Gingrich wants salaries and books.
Santorum.
Doesn't anybody want?
what does Santorum
Doesn't
want?
anybody want to be president?
What is-
No, if that's not their agenda, come on now. They've got the prize in their
They
eye.
want to be governor.
Yes, people
much
do want to be
work.
president, but I think
All right.
the math is already
Okay.
done. Look at what the New Jersey Christie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, didn't want to get in.
He's too
Why
busy
not?
eating.
Because he knows this year probably won't fare well for the Republicans, regardless of who wins the primary. The odds are stacked against them heavily.
Why is that? Does it come down to electability? And I asked this almost specifically about Santorum because that's where I see the most criticism coming in. If we were to see a GOP presidential candidate, Rick Santorum,
Be the best thing for the Democrats ever.
That's
right?
what I keep
Yeah, but
hearing. Is this true? Is he unelectable, as they
That's
say?
patently
Yes.
untrue. Let me explain why, okay? What everyone's confusing is Obama's likability. Look, the coalition he put together last time was one that was swayed by the independents. The Republicans voted Republicans. The Democrats, in larger numbers, voted for Democrats. It was the independents. That is the vote that counts.
Who won't
okay?
vote for Rick Santorum?
And
Ever.
well, you don't know that. You
I do
don't
know that
I
because
think
they're
the
all for
independents.
contraception. They're all for
I don't
women's
think
right
that's
to
the
choose.
issue. I don't think that's the issues they're going to go after. They are hopping mad. The independents, and you look at it poll after poll, they're hopping mad because government is taking over everything. Health care.
They want
And it goes
healthcare.
on and on.
They want healthcare.
They want. Well, it's still it's still unpopular. The popular vote is against it.
Independents are,
The more they
independents
learn
are a
about it,
much
the more
larger
popular it is.
category on paper than I think they are in reality. I mean, when you talk about independents, you have a lot of independents who lean Republican and a lot lean Democratic, and you've got a relatively small slice in the middle, 10, 15%, who are really persuadable. So you have a lot of different types. Some who are animated by the social issues, liberal social issues. Some of them are actually sort of Tea Party people. So I disagree that it was independents that do it. But I guess back to the question of, is the Republican doomed? And certainly if Rick Santorum is the nominee, he's a worse candidate for the Republicans than Mitt Romney. It may not be as bad as the media points that it's 10, 15 points difference, but If it's 3 or 4 or 5 points difference for Republicans, that certainly puts the election out of their range.
He couldn't even win his own state.
Yeah.
He
Well,
couldn't even
look,
win Pennsylvania,
primary-
which is actually very much like the rest of the United States.
Well,
Nixon did the same thing when he lost California in 1966.
Well, that's true.
Look, I'm not a
Look how
proponent
that
for
turned
Rick.
out.
I'm not a proponent for Rick Santorum.
Right.
This is a jump ball. This election's different. You've had an economy in the worst recovery from a bad recession since the Great Depression.
The worst recovery.
Yes, the worst recovery in terms of numerical terms, in terms of GDP growth, job recovery, the worst one of any recession since the Great Depression.
No, I'm glad that you bring this up because it's the economy after all that's on the the number one issue for voters this election season. It's jobs, it's the economy. We've seen. I mean, you look at the numbers. There's been a steady growth over the last few years. It's been slow. Jobs grow, stagnate. Is this upward movement, even though it's slow, is it going to be enough for President Obama when voters are taking the booths, taking into account how good is the economy and how much better would it be with a President Santorum, with a President Romney versus keeping President Obama in? How do you think voters are going to be feeling about that?
You know, it's funny. I think that the economy's like a huge hole, right? And we're digging ourselves out of the hole. The growth is there. The last month's job numbers show that there are more Americans employed this month than there were last month. But the growth is really slow. And you look at what's happening in Europe with the economy there, it's very scary. And I think that, you know, something that really the president and the Republicans may have no control over may really hurt the economy, right? I mean, you know, Greece goes down and it could really affect the world economy. So I think that the truth is we are slowly digging ourselves out of this recession. To some extent, President Obama is running on the economy. If the economy does well, he wins. If people are employed, you know, I think that definitely will help the president. And at the same time, something bad could happen that he really has no control over, and it could hurt him.
I think it's a question of whether it's a snapshot or a trend. If you look at the snapshot, the president's doing a lot better than he was in September, October, where his numbers were really quite bad. 42% of the people saying he was doing a good job. Now up more in the 47, 48% range. That number is still not great, though. It's a number that points to a close election. But what we've seen is the last 3 months, part of the reason for that rise, and if this rise were to continue, his numbers are clearly better. So these last 3 months, are you going to tell me that those are the same as the next 3 months? Then I think the president's in a pretty good place for re-election. If we talk about some slipping back, some problems in Europe, gas prices, other things putting us back a little bit, those fundamentals of a close race, I think, are still there. The president is doing better, but he's not in any way in a commanding position in terms of the number of people who think he's doing a good job.
I want to get back to a difference that we saw here between you two. You were talking about the economy and this being the worst recession, the
slowest, most sluggish, lagging recovery.
Right.
I ran out of the adjectives.
Right, Frederick. Do you disagree? Do you feel as though this is you know, the recovery is what it is. The reason I ask is because there's still that wild card in Europe, like we heard a second ago. Europe could still really go either way with Greece and Spain even, which, you know, they're having to handle those two countries separately because they're two different issues. What Portugal, of course, and also what happens in Europe is undoubtedly going to have an effect here in the United States. Whether it's a good outcome there or if it's a bad outcome there, it will affect the United States. What's that effect going to have on President Obama's chances? Is the real question.
To say this is the slowest recovery in history, at the same, I think this is a bit of hyperbole. What's going on right now is unprecedented. We've never been in this situation before. I think he's dealing with it the best way he can, and it's turning around slowly but surely. And right now, the Republican candidates can't point to one plan or policy they have to turning the country around. So I think they're in a bit of a hole themselves as well, politically. So,
what's the U.S. not doing right then? Whether it would be by the Democrats or the Republicans, the last time the United States was in a situation similar to this would be what, the Great Depression.
The late 1970s.
Well, what was done then to make the recovery faster that the U.S. isn't doing now?
What was done then is very simple. Ronald Reagan came into office. First of all, the recession from 1977 through 1982 almost is really when the lag time was, okay, was equally as deep as this one. Unemployment was equally as deep as this one.
Different set of circumstances.
Economies are economies. I mean, so last year's can't be comparable to next year's. Look, What you had was an economy that was in deep trouble. And what happened? You had an administration that came in, and what they did was cut taxes. Okay.
I want to actually
cut
stop you right there.
regulations.
How many times
for who?
Does it matter? For
Cut
whom?
taxes for who?
Tax-
Yes, it
cut
does
taxes
matter.
for the wealthy.
It does matter.
But whatever they did, of course they cut taxes across
we
the
have the
board.
last
But you know
person
what?
leading
It
trickle-down
launched
economics
30 years of world prosperity like we had never seen. In the Reagan recovery, as opposed to this recovery, by this time we're growing at about 2% GDP. The Reagan recovery was growing by over 4.5%. There was a time in the Reagan recovery in the first 3 years, we had GDP up to 8-9%. This stuff is not coincidental. It's not theoretical. You know, until the Obama administration had come in, the whole thought of Keynesian economics was already moot. It was already discredited by most economists.
Can I just say, I so disagree with this. In
Well,
fact,
you
it's
can't
the other
disagree
way
with
around.
numbers.
What
You
Reagan
may not
built up
like
was
them,
the
but they're hard to
deficit that we're
disagree.
still dealing with. The lowering taxes for the rich leads to nothing but the rich getting their bonuses. And you know what's really interesting is that we've proven that trickle-down economics doesn't work. So it's funny that you found someone who still thinks that.
From 1980 to 2005, you've proved just the opposite. You cannot deny facts. Facts are stubborn things.
Right,
If you
like
can show
the deficit from Reagan.
Well, listen.
You know.
Well,
But
listen.
Reagan
we're back
did
to the
raise
Jimmy
taxes, and he did so several times. That's
Right,
something that
exactly.
Americans are
He
are
raised the
opposed
payroll
to.
tax. He
Americans are
cut
opposed
marginal
to.
taxes, and he cut capital gains taxes. He raised the payroll tax, which had gone through. That was the deal with Tip O'Neill.
Americans
let's be
actually
honest
really
about it.
want to see higher taxes on wealthy Americans.
Do you
Poll
guys
after
do?
poll.
Let me jump in. I actually am somewhat sympathetic to Roland's view that smaller government and lower taxes are generally good for the economy. But we do have different types of recessions here, right? We have one coming out of a financial crisis and worry about deflationary pressures. And both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have had their own stimulus-like measures, whether that's lower payroll taxes, more spending, Republicans wanting to keep the Bush tax cuts. A lot of people agree it's not the best time today to be raising taxes or to be cutting back dramatically on spending this year or the next year. But I think the real problem out there that everybody knows about and is very hard to deal with is that we have very serious long-term structural problems. Mm-hmm. And we need to get out of this trough, and we need to get jobs, and we need to, that's part of the solution. But part of the solution is we've made many, many promises about benefits for seniors and health care benefits for seniors that we just don't have the revenues coming in to pay. And it's very hard to find a agreement between the parties who have very different philosophies about this.
That's a very good point that you bring up. We're about entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and even health care, which is coming back into the scene as a point of contention. It's going back to the Supreme Court, health care again. How would a President Romney, for example, who had a arguably similar plan in Massachusetts in place than that of President Obama's federal health care bill, how would that be different? How would that be different if President Romney were the 2012 man? Would this still be a debate? Would Romney care get that same flack that Obamacare, as they call it? Would that be any different?
It probably wouldn't be different, but it wouldn't be any better either.
I think it would definitely be different. The rhetoric that's been used around Obamacare, even calling it Obamacare, there's a certain undertone that the Republican Party has been using this election cycle that kind of digs at a base that doesn't speak to America's best qualities. I'll say that. So yes, I think it would be different. But then again, we have to remember in 2008, America voted for health care under Obama. I think it's been demonized through rhetoric and cunning campaign tricks and what have you. But I don't think Obama will have a problem with it.
In a program that we had to pass it to see what's in it. Okay, talk about trickery and some probably not up and up politics. I think 2010 repudiated that 2008 vote for health care. 2010, when the Republicans took over the Congress, that was the #1 issue. So you can't go out and say the people love it. I mean, come on.
Was a group of radical Republicans
that persuaded
banding
the
together.
populace.
Yes.
Based on lies,
And yes, based on lies, manipulation, and deceit. So
Yeah,
those
Medicine.
is that
Well,
I'm not going to get into this argument.
If you believe that, do you believe
if that's
that
where it goes?
the members of the Tea Party speak to true and pure morals and
So they fooled all the people some of the time. Is that what you're telling me?
no, yeah,
Okay.
when need
Fair.
to, yeah, they'll poke them with a stick. I completely agree.
On healthcare, one thing I think is clear that the polling numbers really haven't changed that much. I know Democrats thought that the process was really messy and that once people started to see it come online, numbers would change, but they really haven't. So I think this has been
come online yet.
well, it's true. No, that's absolutely true. It's implemented
So
over a long period of time.
It hasn't affected
But
you,
the debate hasn't changed, and the numbers are negative on
So has
on
President
healthcare for the
Obama's
president.
policies, healthcare being his signature legislation, at least for his first term, that's what people will remember, I think.
A lot of it is...
Has it been successful? Has his policies been
Yeah.
Politically, I mean, it was a very important win for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has wanted major healthcare reform for a generation, and he was a successful president getting it done. But it's turned out not to be a popular policy. I mean, it's liked by low 40% of the people, disliked by almost 50% of the people. That number hasn't changed a whole lot. So, there still is, I think, out there some worries. Now, will that lead to wholesale rescinding of health care? If Mitt Romney's president, he actually, despite his policies in Massachusetts, has said, look, he wants to get rid of it. And some parts are going to be hard to get rid of because it's hard to use, with the supermajority needed in the Senate, get rid of everything. But a lot of the big subsidies coming online are going to be up for grabs in a budget fight that is going to be going on next year with Romney in place. With the president and what's likely to be a Republican Congress, I think we're going to see an incredible amount of gridlock in the way that we've seen in the last 2 years.
There's a chance that there will be a Republican Senate and a Republican Congress. So, if you really think the possibilities are mind-blowing. But I think that what the president is going to run on is his success leading the country. He killed Osama bin Laden. He saved the auto industry. I mean, I think healthcare could be a net plus once people understand what's in it, but I think it's going to take some explaining because it hasn't really been implemented yet. He handled.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Which the president's good at doing. I think if he has a time on the campaign to go around and explain and debunk some of the myths that are being perpetuated by the other party,
That
will be
changed
fine.
2 years ago. Why is he waiting? Yeah. They couldn't even explain it before
Because
it was
he's running the
passed.
country. He doesn't have-
I'm sorry to cut you off. This is a great debate. We're going to take a short commercial break. There's still a lot of obstacles in the way for economic recovery. We've got unemployment, high fuel costs. These are all topics we'll discuss in the second half. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to 2 Half Hours, our special coverage of the 2012 elections. Our panel was just discussing subjects regarding obstacles within the economy, obstacles against economic recovery, and what are you guys thinking? Do you think is unemployment still being high is going to affect President Obama's chances? Unemployment, a lot of people are saying, the numbers are reflecting more people just dropping out of the job market, are no longer looking for jobs. Underemployment is still high. Do you think this is going to be a factor going in as the race narrows?
So most research shows that it's not so much the level of unemployment or the level of the economy as much as the change in the 6 or 8 months at the beginning of the year. And so far, even though we've started from a very low level, the last 3 months have been pretty good for the president. If that continues, if we see the next 3-4 months like that, I think that's very good for the president. Even if that only means 8% unemployment, which is high by historical standards, there'll be some improvement. I think that'll be good for the president.
It always helps him, but there's something that's confronting the economists, and it's baffling them right now. Generally, employment, or the lessening of unemployment, is led by new growth in the GDP and the economy. And that's the opposite is occurring. So a lot of economists are kind of crossing their fingers, hoping that this recovery in unemployment, or employment rather, does not fizzle out because it's not coming along with a growth, commensurate growth in the GDP. So that that can be a curveball that comes out sometime in the third quarter before the election.
I also think there's a couple of danger signs where, because everyone here has been talking about the deficit and people concerned about that, as state and local governments and even the federal government, as they cut back, those are cops, teachers, firefighters, people who make a decent living, who serve a purpose, who are losing their jobs. The growth in the economy is in the private sector. And I think that one of the things we're seeing is there are pockets, like the African-American community, still double-digit unemployment. This show is from Washington, D.C. The employment rate in D.C. for white people is 3%. I mean, that's low. It's 20% for African Americans. So, I mean, I still think there are pockets of unemployment that are really, they may not be a problem for the president, but they're a problem for the country. Same thing with Americans over 50 years old. There's, people who've been out of work for a year or two who are over 50 who cannot get jobs, even really menial jobs. And I think that, I'm someone who believes there is a role for government. Of course, we need to invest in schools. We need to make sure future generations are well educated. We need to take care of sick and poor people. And so it's all, what is your view of government?
Another point that I'd like to get your opinion on is one other obstacle facing economic recovery, of course, is the mortgage crisis, foreclosure crisis, which, arguably is what got us in the mess in the first place. Housing prices still not bottomed out. Foreclosures are still high. They're forecasted to be high for the next few years even. How is that affecting economic recovery? And I haven't seen this being a point of contention among the Republican runners right now. They're not really bringing this up, but it seems to really be on the minds of people in the United States, especially those 4 to 8 million families who have lost their homes due to foreclosures in the last 4 years. Is the United States actually climbing out of this crisis, and how long is it going to be before we see these home prices bottom out?
I think the problem is the market still has overhang. All the foreclosures were held up because of the legal issues, the robo-signing and so forth. And what you've got is all this overhang that has yet to come to the market. You cannot clear it. You cannot get what we call a clearing price, which is the hurdle where recovery starts from, until all the inventory is on the market, and the market readjusts to a new and natural equilibrium, as opposed to an unnatural equilibrium because there's so much pent-up foreclosures to come out. That's what needs to happen. Instead of trying to forestall foreclosures, it doesn't work. The pain is there. It's going to come out. You need to let the market clear up. And until that happens, we will not see a strong recovery in real estate prices.
Millions of Americans are still looking to the government for a solution to this. They're looking to the the Federal Reserve. In the past, the Federal Reserve would have traditionally lowered its interest rates for borrowers to pay less for their mortgages. The federal interest rate,
but that's not the problem. That's not the problem. The people are they're underwater. The problem is not the monthly affordability. It's the value of the houses are a lot less than the values of the mortgages.
Well, what kind of obstacle does this pose for the economy, for recovery? And this is just one that I mentioned. We're still looking at high gas prices, people paying more at the pump. You're spending less money everywhere else. Like, these are real obstacles that are affecting people every day. And, I mean, this is going to be affecting the economy. I mean, we're talking about whether these last 3 months, John, you mentioned, were good for President Obama's ratings. If gas prices keep going up, do you see that changing?
Well, I do think that no matter what happens, there is going to be more overhang in the mortgage market, and growth in general is not going to come back the way it has from other recessions. I agree that it's a slower growth, longer-term comeback. Now, that being said, growth is good for the president, even if it's 2.5%. That's generally good for the president. It's not the boom that came out of the Reagan years where he won by a landslide. And I don't think even the best case scenario is President Obama winning by a landslide. It's him doing better and winning by a fair amount. He's not likely to win as much as he did in his first term in 2008, where there were a lot of good things going for Democrats. What about the economy in general? Look, I think the economy in general is the problem of the gas prices is one possibility of a slowing down from where we've been in the last 3 months. Problems in Europe, problems in the Middle East, which cause a greater shock to oil prices or just general shock to the world. I mean, all of those things are out there, but it's really the next 3, 4, 5 months. If the president can keep this kind of growth going, probably going to be enough to put him over the finish line.
The other interesting thing about this is a lot of Americans are rethinking what the American dream is, right? So it used to be everybody wanted a house. And I think now a lot of people think if you can't afford a house, you can't afford a house, you rent an apartment. So a lot of it is, I mean, some people would argue the housing bubble where, you know, people paid ridiculous amounts for houses, maybe that wasn't good for this country. Maybe we all need to think about it.
So are you thinking are you maybe implying that the American dream is not what it used to be? It's evolving into something else?
There are parts of it that are not what it used to be, which it's fine for us to move past. There are parts that we need to recapture. The important part of the American dream that is the essence of America is anybody being able to be whatever they want to be. So if we lose upward mobility, we have really lost, and we're losing it. I mean, something we really need to think about and have, I believe, government policies and private sector policies, too, that help us get upward mobility back, solid education.
And I think you're absolutely right. We need, but I want to go back to something in energy prices. It's not Obama's fault.
Right, I agree.
Okay?
Sure. Yeah.
You know what the problem is? This is a monetary problem. You've had the Fed print so much money. And where did the money go? It didn't go, you know, normally when the Fed prints too much money, it goes to, it seeks its own level or a level that it can flow down in 2001 and 2002 when the Fed started flooding it. Where did it go? It didn't go into the stock market because the stock market was collapsing and went to the real estate market, residential real estate. Now the stock market was in trouble, real estate was in trouble. Where did all that money go? It went into commodities because all the commodities in the world are denominated in dollars.
Being gambled with. It's ridiculous.
Well, that's not gambling.
I want to get back to the
totally
impact that this has.
That's patently untrue. It really is. But that's what's caused the rise in energy prices. Is our dollar has gone down. It's the same price in gold as it's always been.
I want to get back to what impact this has on the elections, where you have candidates like Newt Gingrich promising $2 a gallon for gasoline. How much of that would a President Gingrich have control over?
None.
He
can have a lot of he can have a lot of control over it because if he can reintroduce non-inflationary growth into the economy, that will lower energy prices. You've got to remember commodities, oil. Those prices don't change. Your currency changes. So the idea is to do exactly what Reagan did in 1980, where he strengthened the U.S. dollar by policies that were pro-growth and that were non-dilutive or non-inflationary. To suggest otherwise is just a misunderstanding of the facts.
In theory. But
well, will
the gas prices have an effect on the chance for Obama being reelected? Maybe. And it's really sad that it might. I think again, like I said before, the whole notion that the president can somehow control or do something to impact international gas prices, I think, is more lies and deceit that Republicans are perpetuating to score campaign points. Excuse me. So whatever. It's just
let's talk about the Republicans again a little bit. The divide. Among them when they're talking about gas prices, how much control are they going to have over what actually works in the economy? Do you think more Americans are really looking to the Republican Party as not so much an alternative to what Democrats are doing right now, but as a solution to the problems that the Democrats have caused? Have the Democrats actually been responsible for the slow recovery versus a faster recovery?
You know, if you look at the Republicans who are participating in the primary and caucus process, it's actually a very small slice of America. I mean, if you look at the number of people who've really participated, most Americans don't pay attention to politics until right before the general election. I mean, you know, we're all political people, we're all junkies, we watch the debates, we pay attention, but if you look at, you know, the entire population, I don't know what the percentage is of Americans who really pay attention, but it's not I'm not proud of this. It's not a broad cross-section of Americans.
I would say it's a lack of enthusiasm.
I think that's actually a very good point. And when Americans do turn on the news, American media outlets like CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, what's being contended is these other issues, like smaller issues. It almost seems as though the Republicans, what they're debating right now is who's more conservative, who likes Ronald Reagan more than the other. Do you guys see that being the case? And is this?
Well, they call that politics, right?
Is the nomination?
Isn't that going to happen next October, November?
Well, they also call it a primary within
yeah.
the party. And again, if you look back to the Democrats' debate in 2008, when Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were trying to say who's more against the war in Iraq, who would get out faster, who would be more universal in their health care.
They were talking about policies, you know.
But they were talking about things that actually are more popular. I mean, the Republicans talking, about women not having access to birth control. I can't believe that's going to help them in the general election.
Yeah, but the Republicans don't bring that up. That's an issue that's brought up by Democrats and thrown out there.
Well, Rick Santorum seems to be bringing it up.
He's forced to bring it. It's being brought up to him. I'm not a Rick Santorum.
No, I know.
What are you going to do? Paint the whole Republican Party on one person's comments?
I agree. Mitt Romney is not bringing it up.
Let's look at it fairly. You're right. It's a primary. These are the issues that the Republican Party is discussing right now. And I think if you look at the primary turnouts for Republicans.
Yeah, I'm a little reluctant to say that social issues are really going to hurt Republicans in the fall. I do think in 2010 it was a perfect storm for Republicans where they could really just talk about the economy and from their point of view say, look, deficits and debt are bad, big government's bad, everything's going poorly, and didn't really talk as much about foreign policy or social issues. So that's somewhat more uniting for Republicans. But if Republicans' social issues were always a problem for them, Democrats would just be beating them over the head with them every single presidential election. There's a divide. And on some of these issues, the populace is moving. I think on some gay rights issues, you see the difference between different generations, and those issues are slowly moving in one clear direction. But when you look at issues like abortion, yes, there are many more people who are pro-choice than pro-life, but there are a lot of people who support a lot of these restrictions, waiting periods, not wanting to fund them in government, and we argue over them. But the parties have a relatively equal divide on social issues. Both parties are a little reluctant to want to run on those issues in the fall. It will primarily be about the economy, not foreign policy, not social issues in the fall.
But that brings us back to Ron Paul, because one of the fascinating things about him is that his supporters are young.
Yep.
And
but there aren't so many of them.
There are not that many of them. But if you look at the Republican Party will be dying out, right? Because they don't have youth support. And I think that's one of the reasons why they can't just, I'm sure they'd love to put Ron Paul back in a closet, but they can't because he's got young enthusiastic supporters.
Speaking on enthusiasm, I want to talk a little bit about the activist approach that we've seen in the last year alone, starting in September and October with the Occupy Wall Street movement. That was huge. It really just captured every headline for months. It seems to have died down a little bit. Some would argue that it's the weather. Maybe it'll pick back up as spring gets here. But what impact do you think this has had? The term 99% has become almost a everyday use for people. What impact has the movement itself had on these elections, on what we can expect to see from policies throughout 2012?
I think it's had a huge impact. The president, Democrats, even some Republicans are talking more about inequality. I mean, in truth, America is a very wealthy country. There's, the 1% of America control an awful lot of wealth, and the gap between rich and poor is getting wider. That's not news, but because of the Occupy movement, reporters are talking about it. I can think of 3 D.C. bureaus that have started poverty desks in the last several weeks. That's because of Occupy, and they deserve credit for bringing that to the forefront.
They do, but you've got to remember, in every economic pullback, recession of any magnitude, the gap between the haves and the have-nots always increases. This is nothing new. It wasn't just invented by Republicans and their policies to steal all the money from the people, okay? The top 1% pays over 40% of the income taxes in this country. That is a big piece of taxes. Talk about the poverty level in this country. At the poverty line, do you realize 42% of people in poverty own a home? Do you realize 95% of them have telephones? 75% of them have at least one. Most of them have 2 cars. Do you realize that the poverty level, the number of square feet in the house they live in the United States, is greater than almost every major country in Europe except for, I believe, Denmark and Belgium? So we don't have it so bad in this country. And yes, when you have an economic pullback, that kind of thing happens. It's when the economy heals, that equality, when you have the makeup.
But I think on the Occupy movement, I think it certainly has given voice to people, changed the debate some, and really energized some Democrats. Has it moved public opinion? There are some aspects of public opinion where people in general are more willing to tax the rich, but those numbers haven't really moved a lot. So I think at the end of the day, you look at the Tea Party as a very animating force for Republicans, but you start to look at who the supporters of the Tea Party over the time is. It's conservative Republicans want smaller government. Who are the supporters of Occupy? It's not It's not 99%. It's not even 50%. It's a good, strong core of Democrats who care about inequality. Probably haven't been hearing those issues enough. The president has tapped into that some, but has the country really moved public opinion-wise?
Well,
I don't think it's changed.
In other countries, in Europe particularly, you would get criticism of the United States saying that Americans or the vast majority of Americans are apathetic. You don't see any a lot of rioting, a lot of protesting, and it hasn't been since the 60s and 70s that's actually been out until now, until last year, where you had this big Occupy movement. Do you think this is a move away from apathy and Americans becoming more politically active and more engaged in the activities of their government?
I mean, I think, honestly, if the economy continued to get bad, there probably would have been more people in the streets demanding change. As people get jobs, they're at work. They're not going to be in the streets sleeping in the park. So, I mean, I really think the Occupy movement was, a lot of, for example, students who had huge student loan debts who couldn't get jobs. They get jobs, they won't be in the movement. So
how is that really different? How is that really different from the Tea Party movement and then the message that the Tea Party had in the last 3 years, saying we want to take our country back, we want these changes, we want things to be different, we want change. That doesn't seem like too different of a movement.
Republicans embraced the Tea Party and they mobilized. Have Democrats embraced the Occupy Wall Street movement and mobilize them? No, I think that's what's missing. So I think the blame kind of falls on the Democrats with that one. So,
although part of that is it's hard to do that when you have a president in the White House of the same party. I mean, President Obama has been partly embracing Occupy, and Occupy has been partly embracing him, but also partly criticizing him. And it's an easy target. When you're the president of the United States, everyone reacts against you. If you see a Mitt Romney presidency, I think you'll see the Occupy movement just much more clearly be able to express its message. There will be some dangers to the Democrats, just as there are dangers to the Republicans having the Tea Party go too far. We'll see how that goes. But their voice, I think, will be much clearer than it is today, where they're partly want the president to win and partly they want to be critical.
On strategy by the Republicans, was it smart of the Republicans to embrace the Tea Party? Because what we saw with the Tea Party that we're not seeing with the Occupy movement is that they got their people, they mobilized, they had their campaigns, they were very grassroots, and they got their people elected into Congress. And you have Tea Partiers in the Senate, you have Tea Partiers in Congress, but you don't have any occupiers in there. You don't have any of the 99%, the so-called 99%. Does that mean that the Tea Party was more effective at whatever it was that they were
Well,
doing?
I think the largest difference is the Tea Party actually had objectives. They had goals. They had items on the agenda that were specific. Occupy Wall Street didn't. What the Tea Party had, the Republicans didn't embrace the Tea Party. They embraced the concepts of the Tea Party. That's what's so important here. They embraced the concept of smaller government, lesser regulation, smaller taxation. That was a real viable concept out there. That's what was embraced.
But do you think the Tea Party is hurting Republicans? Tea Party, they are running against Orrin Hatch, who, I consider a pretty conservative guy, right? Mm-hmm. They may defeat someone who's very senior and really hurt the Republicans. So I don't disagree with anything you said.
I don't agree with a lot of things about the Tea Party, but look, they have the right to go and pick whoever they want.
Do you think
this is
he's saying is that
process.
smart?
I'm asking if this was a good strategy by the Republicans. And the reason I ask is looking back to last year, the United States lost their AAA credit rating. The country nearly defaulted on its debt, and a lot of that fell on the backs of members of Congress who just moved the dialogue along to the very last minute, and creditors lost faith in that the United States would come up with a solution. And
that was because of the Tea Party.
This is what I hear.
But Tea Party was a series of concepts. The Republicans embraced the concepts. There was a movement, a formal movement behind it called Tea Party, but it was more important that they embraced the concepts, and you've got to separate the two.
But don't you think they're eventually going to hurt conservatives?
They may.
If you are a conservative and not a Tea Partier, don't you think that the Tea Party is sort of hurt? They're hurting John Boehner's strength.
It can happen.
I'm not for John Boehner, but I'm just saying. You asked,
but
is it a good strategy?
But that's the beauty of the American system.
Yeah, it is.
That's the beauty of it. That's how democracy works.
The other thing that's really interesting is there are some similarities with Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Partiers. Both sides are really disgusted with the way money is infused in politics in the United States. It's interesting. I think that there are actually some similarities, and if someone can capture, the energy in both those movements and work on, getting money out of politics, for example, there are really some really interesting similarities. I can't think of another similarity.
Speaking of similarities, just on the topic of similarities, if we were to see if you want to pull out your crystal balls and tell me who's going to be the nominee, who's going to get the nomination from the Republicans, say it's someone like Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney gets most of his endorsement, most of his funding comes from Wall Street, comes specifically Goldman Sachs is his largest contributor. You look over at the Obama campaign, however, he gets a lot of money from Wall Street too. Who is his largest contributor? Goldman Sachs. So where's the difference in these two candidates when you have people from the Tea Party, people from the so-called 99% Occupy movement saying we need to get money out of politics, but you've got your two largest contenders both funded largely by Wall Street, by the large financial institutions. So where do you draw the line on who's the better candidate that's against corporate money infused into American politics?
Don't you guys think Wall Street would prefer Romney? Wall Street would prefer Romney. They give money to both.
No, Wall Street has become much more democratic. Look at during the 2008 campaigns, most of the money went to Obama. Look, Wall Street. You know what Wall Street wants? They want certainty. They don't care what you do, as long as they've got certainty. Well, okay, if we're going to raise taxes, fine, this is what it's going to be. They don't want change. That's what Wall Street doesn't want.
It's a problem that they fund both sides. I mean, I agree.
All the candidates are hypocritical when they point fingers at the other candidate and saying, you're taking money from X. When they all take from X. I mean, we've got a finance problem, and we have to deal with it.
Although I will say that, a lot of times we complain that the parties are so far apart. And in many ways, they are. There's not as much of a middle as there was. There's not as much overlap between the parties. To say that they're both they have the same set of positions, that they both have Wall Street's positions, there's a boundary. There's a certain limit that they do not want to have Wall Street very uncomfortable with their policies. That's bad for the economy as well as perhaps bad for their finances. But they're still going to have some very significant differences. I mean, this election, even with Mitt Romney, I think is a likely nominee, being the most moderate of the Republican candidates, there's some significant differences between the president and Mitt Romney that are not reflected in the fact that both get a lot of money from Wall Street.
But wait, don't you think that America needs to learn that Wall Street is not the same as America? I mean, I think if the financial crisis taught us anything, there's actually just a really interesting article in the New York Times this week by a guy who worked at Goldman Sachs who was saying, everyone here is corrupt, and by the way, they want to help themselves, not their clients. I mean, I think one of the lessons we need to learn is that I agree with everything you're saying, that the parties are not that far apart and that, Wall Street has some power even in Washington. I think the Obama administration is better about trying to control Wall Street. So, I'm pro-Obama. But I do think it's something we as a democracy really need to think about, because just assuming that what's best for Wall Street is what's best for the economy, I mean, that's not true. We now know that's not true.
But the
percentage of people from Wall Street giving money to the candidates, even with this development of the super PACs and all this, is still, not the highest percentage, not a majority. I mean, it's relatively spread around. Even Mitt Romney, who's raising from some big donors, is still raising from thousands and thousands of people. So I actually don't think in a presidential race that the donors get that much out of it. Most people who give the maximum amount of money don't walk into the White House and demand a job. They don't demand policies. You may see that at a congressional level, worries about chairman of committees getting especially close with certain interests. But in a presidential race, this is about the highest level where, yes, there's a lot of money, but there's no one interest dominating, and that the ideology between the two parties is pretty strongly different. And those ideologies are more different than the idea that they're all changing their policies to curry favor to Wall Street.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the entitlement programs. We are running out of time, but Congressman Paul Ryan, this is someone that I feel every one of the Republican candidates right now kind of looks to his plan when talking about entitlement programs. Would we actually see a shift from more social programs into a pseudo-privatized...
if that happens, there will be riots in the streets. I mean, if you cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid the way he's suggesting, I promise you...
But do you see this happening with so much support from the Republican base?
No, because they're blowing smoke. There's no...
Do you see there being support for that?
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? You're seeing this being played out in the states right now. Stockton, California just declared bankruptcy. They can't pay the obligations. If you can't pay them, what are you going to do? Print more money? You'll really have riots in the street if you have hyperinflation. Look, the system doesn't support the level of entitlement funding that's required. It's that simple. You can't You can't spend more than
we
you make
stopped-
for so long. That's why we got a credit
If we stopped
downgrade. We're down
cutting
to double
sweetheart
A.
deals with the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance
Well, we should
companies,
cut
if we
them all.
raise taxes on the wealthy,
We
we
should-
could take care of our old and sick, which is what the kind of America
you raise
that I
all
want.
the taxes you want. You won't even dent the entitlement program. You can double the taxes. It won't make a difference.
If you
the
keep
point
giving
is
kickbacks
the
to the
elephant.
drug companies.
The elephant is much, much too big. Okay, you have to cut the spending. Europe is failing. We saw it in Greece. We see it in Spain. We see it in France. We see it in Italy. We see it in England. We see it in the United States. We're down to double A. What do we have to go to triple B before you figure it out? You can't spend more than you make. It's that simple. There's not enough money out there to
You
fulfill
can't
these
keep padding the
obligations.
insurance companies'
There is the rubber is going to hit the road, and it is already starting to hit the road. And so, there are different ways in which the president and whoever that is and the Congress can go about it. If you do see a Romney presidency with likely a Republican Congress, there's going to be strong pressure to do it just on the spending side. That's very difficult. But if Obama is reelected and you have a Republican Congress, lots of gridlock like we've seen in the last couple of years, but they have that same problem. And whether it involves some tax increase as well as cuts in Social Security, cuts in our long-term health care programs, it's a serious thing that neither party can ignore. And pushing it down the road 4 more years is not going to happen. And it will involve significant cuts and some tax increases.
We are about
perhaps
to be out of
more.
time. I'm so sorry to cut you off. One last word. I just want to hear, who will President Obama be running against? Look in your crystal balls real quick and let me know. Who is going to be the contender?
Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney, Frederick? You seem hesitant.
All right, let me change my vote so we can have a discussion about it.
All right. Well, as you can see, the debate continues. Please join us again next time with the same debate and a fresh new host of opinions right here on 2.5 Hours with special edition with the 2012 elections. Again, my name is Manuel Rapalo, and I want to thank our guests. Please join us again next time.